Greetings and salutations, good morning, good evening and good afternoon, and welcome to this special edition of the Women of BSV. Today we are joined by Dr Craig S Wright, and we are going to discuss his new paper called The Philosophy of Time. Now, myself, Ruth and Craig are in the UK, so to me, we are in the present time. Now, Ethel is over in Australia, so to me, Ethel is in the future, and we were going to be joined by Robin, who may pop up later, who is in the US, and she, to me, is in the past time. So we have past, present, and future. But with time being one of the most philosophically interesting areas of metaphysics, what really is time? Is time even real? Does time flow? Why is there time rather than no time? Do the past, present, and future even exist? Now, according to Albert Einstein, time is what a clock measures. How do you actually describe the nature of time? Is time a language? Is time a technology? What is our conscious experience of time? What are our external perceptions of time? Now, there's a gentleman called Mac Taggart, who has an argument that there is A theory, which is tense, dynamic, and common, and B theory, which is static, tenseless, or an illusion. So does time even exist? What is God's relationship to time? Does time fly when we are having fun? Or does time really stand still? Now, these are just some of the questions that hopefully we will be looking into today. So thank you, Craig, for so generously giving us your time today to join us and talk about this absolutely fascinating subject and this fascinating paper that you've written. So my first question to you, Craig, is why did you change the title from The Nature of Time to The Philosophy of Time?
Oh, well, because it was being done in a philosophy postgraduate class, so it's a dissertation for that. I guess it doesn't really matter, but anyway.
So that's a very
natural philosophy versus, just a simple little change.
Okay, and my second question is, you reference Craig quite a lot, who is Dr. William Lane Craig, and I just wondered who he is to you, because you reference him quite often in the paper, so who is he to you?
Oh, well, I mean, he's just a researcher, really. So when you read, you find other supporting material, etc. So that's really, he's just heavily involved in discussions on the philosophy of time in certain areas. So.
Right. Well, look, I'm going to get into the actual nitty-gritty of the paper itself. I'm going to just give like a 2-sentence summary of what, the gist of what I took from it, and you can let me know whether it's anywhere in the ballpark. So I'm saying you can't invoke a black hole singularity because that itself invokes infinity, and we're in a non-infinite universe. So if there is no infinity, there can be no singularity, which means there can be no black holes.
Fairly much. That's one thing. So first of all, you can't actually have a mixture of infinite and non-infinite in the same physical environment. It's a problem with a Platonic conception of numbers. Plato liked to put numbers into this realm of something else, whereas they're not. Numbers themselves are something that we create. While they have value and they're only there when they're utilized. So as an example, when we're drawing a function and saying it goes to infinity, well, it doesn't actually reach infinity. It isn't a function to infinity. It is only when we reach the particular number that we're talking about does it exist. Add a zero, etc. Only at that point does it become part of what we're doing, and it remains infinitely smaller than infinite. So it goes right back to the problem of Zeno and Zeno's paradox. And if we keep dividing things infinitely, we have problems. But the answer there is to just even quantize time. So if we find, basically a quantized time slice, just as we have quantized physical objects, and note that time itself seems to be in clicks or phases, then they may be very small and outside of our immediate perception, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Now, when we're talking about a singularity, the problem that people are ignoring is they're assuming that we've already reached the end stage of time. So a singularity only exists after an infinite amount of time has occurred. Now, there's a problem in that very description. If it requires an infinite amount of time to reach an infinity, then it doesn't actually ever have a possibility of existing. Now, if you start thinking about what happens as you go into the increased gravity, as you approach the Schwarzkopf radius, then what happens is your perception of time, your movement in what appears to you to be time, sort of stays the same, but for the outside world, it slows. So if I'm standing here and you're over there on my screen at the edge, getting slightly closer and closer to the point of the singularity, then what you're going to find is everything appears normal to you. But what I see is that you are slowing down and getting to stasis. And if I watch over an extended period in our hypothetical thought experiment, and I watch over billions of years at a frame, so billion, 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 then what I'm seeing is you're slowing down more and more as you're getting slightly closer, and you're never, ever reaching that outer radius. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, every black hole, well, if we assume Hawking was correct, slowly evaporates. Mm-hmm. So no matter how big it is, we find that we don't ever get to the point of a black hole. So the singularity doesn't form. The black hole will always evaporate before it forms into a singularity. But the next point is when we're thinking about even something inside the black hole, inside what is the singularity point, time has equally slowed at that, and it never ever gets to the phase where it's going to be infinite. Mm-hmm. I mean, so this is what people aren't thinking about. If you think to get to the center point is going to take you a billion years, then that's one thing. But we're talking infinite. But even if we took it out to be hundreds of trillions of years, our universe is only in the order of 14 billion years old. Yeah. And black holes are way less than that. So even the oldest of black holes have gotten anywhere close to a point where you could say that they're anywhere near a singularity. So each of those points really is some sort of vector space that is very, very slowly collapsing and forming a stasis. So it's a different concept. It's big numbers, but big numbers shouldn't make us afraid of doing mathematics. Those of us involved in things like cryptography do big number mathematics all the time. Yeah. So unfortunately, these physicists seem to not want to do that. So what we end up with is a interesting scenario where if you actually start thinking about it from a different perspective, and rather than Einstein's relative time, we now take external observers outside of the gravity well, either side, for instance, will equally see something in the gravity well differently. So what do we consider time? The whole universe as a whole has a similar time structure, although individuals might have their clock slow. But really, isn't that something similar to saying if I'm on a ship and I've got a pendulum-based clock, then the movement and the rocking of the ship changes my time. Mm-hmm. But for every cell in our body, etc. So what we're doing is confounding the rate of sort of entropy change, the individual sort of frame that I'm seeing with everything else. And I would say even Einstein anthropomorphized time.
Okay, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, I would say you're an objectivist in all sorts of other areas, so why not in this as well? It sort of makes sense to me that you would have this objective
Well,
view?
we can sit back, and if I can basically go around isolated parts of the universe and effectively be able to measure time in a way that isn't being affected by gravitational forces in any significant way, and compare that to someone else who has the same time as me, but differentiated, then why should I not say that there's some sort of underlying time? Now, I can say that the aging and the processes inside the gravity well of one of these like forces, like in a singularity near a star, differ. But I mean, why should that be any different to saying that the rate of change of a chemical process differs when I change heat?
Mm-hmm.
Which it does. So, I mean, I can say if I cool something down, the entropic changes are much slower. But if I speed up by heating it, they're much faster. I mean, that becomes similar there. So I would actually say there's some sort of ability to make a universal equivalent of a clock tick at a quantum time level. But the rate of change for each item, each atom, each movement of potentially something like a brain, a string, would be distinct depending on where it is.
And depending on a load of factors, basically.
Yes.
Like you say, temperature and what's near and how fast it's going, and maybe the body of the animal it belongs to, so on.
Well, yeah, I mean, getting even more fundamental to, than that, just down into the individual particles in something.
So fundamentally, do you just think black holes exist?
Not in the way that they're described. No, they're not a singularity. So what they are is some sort of field in Hilbert space that is really difficult to calculate. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to exist. And part of the problem, of course, is that any particle is going to be drawn out and destroyed before it even gets close, for the simple fact that the time effect would be something that utterly, radically changes how something moves. If part of you is traveling at one rate, but another's at a different rate, all sorts of funny things happen.
Oh God, yes. You'd maybe turn into string or something weird. Anyway, so when you get near a black hole, you're saying causality slows to a standstill. So Hawking radiation, does Hawking radiation leave the black hole at the normal rate, or does that slowing of causation also affect the leakage of the Hawking radiation?
It will do both, but all we need are particles that come in and out of existence to fall outside the switch-off range, and one head towards and one head away, and suddenly we have a scenario where, well, it's still occurring. The universe is basically still seeing this device, the black hole singularity thing that people call it, slowly erode, although we're talking potentially trillions of years worth of erosion. And it's not going to hold all this information in the way that people seem to think, or although it would be interesting in a way to see some of the things caught there, because at the edges, with time slowed down to effectively 1 trillion years of our time for a second inside, before you even get anywhere, would mean that there is information still maintained, which is an argument against black holes that mean having information, everything gets destroyed. But if everything never reaches the point where it's destroyed, then the information is still actually maintained. So that's another thing that needs to be investigated more.
Ethel, you ask your question, because we were talking about this before you came along about information entropy, but ask that.
Yeah, I guess I had an idea about entropy relating more so to thermodynamics, and hadn't really heard of information entropy before. Was that introduced by, was one of the people Jacob Birkenstein?
Yes, but it's probably more developed by Shannon.
Oh, yes.
Although Shannon was doing other things, the concept of entropy and communications really grew from that.
Could you explain what it is? Sorry.
Yeah.
So it's a difference between order and something being mixed. It's the number of ways that we can have something displayed, for instance. So if we have everything separated, for instance, we have two liquids, one blue and one red, and there's a screen between them so they don't mix, then the state of entropy is very low. We have a incredibly ordered system. Once we move that screen, then each particle, as it starts moving between the sides, becomes more and more mixed. Of course, not assuming that they're like oil and water. And the level of entropy then changes, equalize the distribution. Eventually, through Brownian motion, we end up with one sort of big mess of one color where everything is mixed in. And overall, the state is then completely distributed. And although there might be occurrences due to motion, etc., where small groups of particles come into an individual color, then it's still because of random Brownian motion and just natural occurrence.
So does that mean that it isn't as useful, or it can't do any work, or does it have any kind of...
Depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about distribution of hot and cold, then once everything's mixed, then no more work will happen. If you're talking about the mixture of colors, then you've got a sort of a substrate of materials that are completely intermingled, and that might have a purpose. So
might have made purple or something.
Yeah, maybe you want that sort of mixed color. So it depends on what you're doing. I mean, there's no one answer to that.
And Craig, can I just ask, did they use information entropy in kind of creating Morse code back in the day to maximize, I guess, how much they were sending across, across the field, so that it wasn't as expensive as sending? So, like, to minimize the letters, I guess.
To a point, yes. Although there would be more efficient ways of doing it, but that would require a lot more knowledge and more difficulty in understanding. Now, for instance, if you consider something like Chinese, the number of letters that cover all the words are actually able to be fairly well compressed into a very small number of digits, much less than you could actually do English if you actually set up a system that encoded all of those letters. Unfortunately, though, even if you take like the top 3,000 characters, then that's a lot of memorizing to do. So, I mean, I'm learning Chinese now, and even going through learning all the silly characters that are sometimes the damn same thing, which actually I find very annoying. I've started discovering sometimes the Chinese letters have multiple, depending on how you have them placed with other letters, have different they sound different, that you say them different, they have different meaning. So you can actually write the same character, it can have different meanings depending on how it's used in context with others, which you don't get with the letter A. The letter A in English is the letter A.
Yeah, there are 4 sounds in Chinese. I know that. So you could say, thinking you're saying one thing, but you've called your mother a horse. by
Yeah.
not actually saying
That's the tonal aspect. But I mean, even some of the words like the character da is also the character day, depending on what context you have it in. And it's more than just the tonal change. It's actually a completely different word with the same writing. So with some of the other ones, like ma and ma, you actually have different characters.
Okay, I feel like we're getting off topic, so I'm going to get back onto the philosophy paper. As interesting as it is, further down in the paper, you talk about a holographic universe. Could you give us like a really short summary of what that means to you?
So there's a concept where as a sort of larger dimensional system is projected against 3 dimensions plus time. Now, in this, what we're thinking about as reality is a larger, misunderstood, and probably potentially not even understandable external universe that we see in the equivalent of, say, the outside of a balloon. If you think about a balloon as a 2-dimensional structure, you then take it into a hypercubal universe with multiple dimensions and broadcast that against 3 dimensions. That would align well with string theory, but it's difficult for us mere humans to understand, being that we're designed to work on those 3 dimensions and our perceptions are only there. What I would see in that is that there isn't really a past or a future in the way that we seem to think. There is the concept of the future and what we hope will happen, but it doesn't actually exist. It's just like numbers. It's a thing that as we move into the next phase of time or next click, there's a next sort of state. And equally, past wouldn't exist because that's just a memory of a previous state.
So you seem to be saying that in order to maybe time travel or something, you'd have to use the universe itself. You'd have to like unwind all of the causality that had occurred.
No, I'm saying there wouldn't actually be any time travel.
Well, no.
Going forward would be the equivalent of just having stasis. For instance, if I was in a stasis field of some type, high gravity, etc., then potentially I could go through and be 1,000,000 years in the future, but I haven't really jumped 1,000,000 years in the future. I've had a no entropy state. The way I would look at it is you've gone through the universe's time, but you have stayed entropically still. So your body hasn't changed, you haven't aged, you have moved along in this frozen state. So it doesn't seem like much of a life because you're not actually living. You're an entropically stable, not growing, not aging, not learning, and you end up
not feeling, discovering, doing, or anything else.
Exactly.
Either.
So you're still in time, that entire process, and then you get into the future where you're unfrozen. The equivalent would be if you'd been put in the freezer and then someone managed to defrost you and
So cryogenics. So does I mean, in that respect then, do you think that because there was talking about folding of the universe and a wormhole, so you actually jump from, is that something that you think is possible? Because that would alter the time
outside of time, no. So where people talk about these things, I don't believe that's possible. I believe it might be possible to have limited sort of folding of space into changing locations, but not time. So we're stuck where we are. So there's no going back and changing the past, effectively, because there is no past.
So the present, again, I'm going to use an analogy you probably won't like, but the present is like a reed head, but there is no tape. Yeah. Okay.
So imagine, I mean, it's a horrible analogy, but we use what we have. And imagine a computer system, and we're a state in RAM. So there isn't anything other than now. And if we consider that the computer's time is the universal time of the universe, then effectively there is no going back. What we could do is recreate earlier states of the universe by moving all of the things around. But the problem we have is we only have the energy from inside this universe to do that with.
And you'd need the whole universe's energy to do it.
Effectively, yes. You'd actually need more energy than we have in this universe to do something with the universe.
Yeah, because it'd be matter.
Which,
so you'd be using all the energy, and then you'd need all that again. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's like there was a theoretical paper on how to make a warp drive vis-a-vis Star Trek, but the amount of energy basically meant destroying a galaxy to be able to move a short distance. So, which I don't think is terribly feasible.
It sounds like you're talking about the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, though.
Very similar, yeah, but then you need a cup of tea.
Sorry, Robin, what were you saying?
I was just joking, not scalable if you need that much energy.
Oh, yeah. So later on in the paper, you're referencing James Clerk Maxwell and Lorentz quite a bit, both who I'm well into. But they seemed quite keen on the idea of an ether. Why no ether?
Well, there's nothing that we seem to be moving against. But then that's also an interesting problem when we consider that we have neutrinos and other things that, or dark energy, dark matter, that we don't have any way of detecting anyway. So who knows if, I mean, I'm not actually saying that we need to have an ether. We could have a universal framework that the universe sits against and effectively has a series of complex, incredibly complex sort of Hilbert space vector equations at any point on, but we don't need to have the ether that was originally posited, because what they were thinking was some sort of thing like matter, some sort of underlying space framework. Even if there is some sort of underlying space framework, whether it's some sort of point Planck particle type something, it doesn't mean that we have any interactions from it. If we don't have interactions from many things like neutrinos, then how do we have interactions from something that we like dark matter, that we have even less sort of ability to measure?
Assuming we've got that theory right.
Yes, correct.
I mean, one of the things I like that you stress in the paper is that a lot of these physicists seem to have become mathematicians and have stopped bothering to refer to reality.
They're also not philosophers, and I find that a little bit problematic. Einstein, for instance, was also a philosopher, so were many at the time, and the concept of how we thought about the universe involved people actually thinking about the universe, not just thinking what they could test, but doing thought experiments, and a lot of theoretical physics has either moved into the realm of mathematics or into something else, which is a post-Hawking's trying to find a way of getting rid of God rather than solving physics. I mean, you don't need to be a believer in God. You can be a deist, you could be an atheist. You still have a problem of going of the question why, and going, oh, it's been here forever is not an answer. I'm sorry. I mean, oh, it was always here. Well, really? Why? Is the first question, and because it was. I'm sorry, but that's...
The way I would see that is, I've always thought about it really simplistically, perhaps too simplistically, is that there can't be nothing. Like, nothing is infinity. There can't be infinity and there can't be nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is nothing, but it becomes a difficult question to think about. But then, if we start thinking about alternatives such as multiverse theory, why anthropomorphize everything? If we're going to say every time there's a thought or a decision, something happens, that's one version of it. But there's the other, every time there's a possible decision. So every time there's a possible clock tick in the universe, then every single particle in the universe has a decision whether it will decay or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that means for every this particle decays, this one doesn't, we have a separate universe. Now, my question there is, where do these universes go? I mean, it's easy if you go, oh, we're infinite, but we're not.
But we're not.
And even if we are infinite, and if these two universes are next to each other, I mean, it's going to get very crowded very soon.
I'm not sure we can invoke the concept of getting crowded in a universe, but all right.
Well, why not? If we're talking about, okay, so we've got two universes, and we're doing this bubble universe theory, which actually does imply that universes push and collapse and have impact on each other. Then what happens with all the ones appearing between them? So you and I are a universe, and now there's one between us, and there's one between it, but there's one over here on that side too.
So it's like,
and
traveling
and causes in an infinite regress of more universes.
And for every single particle, every 10 to the 23 times a second, that's a lot of sort of things just happening.
Yeah.
At some point there would be a collision.
To do a simple thing that is someone who doesn't like Dorking really doesn't understand mathematics as a biologist, and this whole we don't need everything because if we have an infinite universe, there's infinite possibilities is a load of bullshit. I'm sorry. I mean, my example is there are an infinite number of values. If we take not integers but real numbers between the number 1 and 2, but none of them are greater than 3.
Mm-hmm.
So just because you have infinity doesn't mean that you have unicorns flying and magically doing whatever.
There are still laws that must be obeyed.
Yes, every universe would have some sort of law, and unless you're going to argue that somehow we're some sort of silly memory thing that's playing and we're not really us and we're not even the thought experiment, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum, then, well, the universe must not be an infinite regress of infinite universes, in which case we're not even there's no end. We're not, if we're now, there can't be an infinity end because we haven't reached it. And if we're even unbounded, it can't be infinite.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is where people seem to not understand the concept properly, because everything in an unbounded universe is infinitely smaller than an infinite universe at all points.
Now, I tend to think that the universe is just growing constantly. That's my feeling on it. I'm going to run this idea past you and you can see how ridiculous it is. I think that black holes, what we call a black hole, is we're seeing something, but we're not saying what we think we're seeing. I think they're kind of like electromagnetic transformers. So I think they kind of condense energy, maybe spit it out the other side, and they slightly reverse entropy in that sense.
I would say it's more like a capacitor. I mean, it seems to store something, especially if you start thinking that nothing ever really gets into it. And even the stuff in the collapsed area would not be in the destroyed sort of whatever state that they like to make up to make pretty images on TV documentaries.
Membrane around the edge, because that's how I think of it, because I think it has a sort of a cell-like property to it. The energy is stored at the edge in a cell membrane.
Well, if you think about it for a moment, if, say, my phone was to fall into this black hole, then it wouldn't be like everyone says, oh, it's spaghettified and it ceases to exist. What would really happen is my phone's there, sort of in a warped time-space state,
yeah,
and it would seem to be there 1 billion years from now. And 1 trillion years, it'll be there.
yeah,
And 100 trillion years, it'll be there. It'll be a little bit expanded and warped out, but that's the bit people aren't thinking about. So I'll be looking at this and going, okay, my phone seems to be stuck. I can't get it back, because if I go get my phone, I'll be stuck.
I'll be stuck, yeah.
Yeah.
Super gluing it to itself.
But at least when you're there, you can use your phone.
Yeah, that's normal. You probably get really bad reception.
Yeah, I'm stuck on the event horizon. Please come back.
So in my theory of it being essentially, like you say, like a capacitor, or I like to think of it like a substation that kind of, ramps it up, concentrates the energy, maybe spits it out the other end. I don't know. But the idea of that essentially means that it's an electromagnetic sort of vortex, essentially. And so from my perspective, that's why we have Hawking radiation coming out of the middle of it, because in the center of a magnet or an electromagnetic field, there is no electromagnetic field in the center. I don't know if you've ever seen a magnet under a holographic viewer.
No, it has a sort of a cancelled field where everything fairly much, not perfectly zero, but yeah.
Allows the energy leak. Because in a magnet, the push effect of the magnet only exists at the edge. So I think personally that we're looking at basically the energy generators for an electric universe.
Electric's one part of it, but I think it's far more complex than that. I mean,
I'm not trying to pretend that I'm a physicist, but you know what I mean. That in my head,
there's definitely the electromagnetic stage of all this, but I still think there's a lot we don't understand, and by focusing too much on the sort of symmetric theory of particles and everything like that, that is already starting to have cracks. I think too many physicists are overlooking reality for mathematical beauty.
I agree.
Or at least what they consider to be mathematically beautiful. They're chasing down, this formula looks really good. The universe should fit to this formula. But unfortunately, as we've demonstrated many times, some of the sort of aspects of what we think should be the universe don't seem to fit that way. But the other aspect of what I'd say is when you have a gravitational well, such as like we like to call the singularity, then as you get close, of course, you have a dilation effect on like stretching of waves, etc. But I think that again is the change in time, which differs from Einstein's view, because the time, basically the parts of the wave extend because of a time dilation, and that's why it seems to be stretched.
And is that like the Doppler effect?
It's similar, yes, but Doppler is sound, of course, but same sort of thing.
Yeah. Diddy, what were you saying?
I was just wondering about language. I mean, because, language, the way that people term, different theories and things, of the language that they use, has language changed how people perceive time?
It definitely does. So that was part of being a philosophy paper that I covered in there as well, looking right back from some of the early pre-Socratic Greeks, who had many interesting ideas about time that many of which got squashed after Plato, to be simple. He was, anti many of what he would call sophists, but Democritus was also a sophist in both Aristotle and Plato's point of view. So Democritus and his theory of atoms and individual particles was fairly accurate in some very simple ways, but unfortunately sometimes we have sort of dead ends that we stick on for a long time.
So overcomplicating what could be quite a simple theory, really, Ben.
Yeah, it would have been interesting if, rather than Aristotle's view of the universe, we had settled on something like Democritus and sat there going, there are these little tiny particles that are indivisible at the heart of everything, and although he described them in a funny way, like fire was spiky, it must be a spiky particle. He used the language like you were getting at the time. Fire's hot and it hurts, so it must be spiky.
Seems fair.
Say what you do, yes.
Old Democritus had some interesting, like water. Didn't realize about the breakdown of water and the necessity to have multiple of these particles together, and the atom shouldn't be the atom; it should be some sort of quark or less. But yeah, I mean, Democritus didn't know any of that anyway.
Yeah, we can't really go back and complain, when they had such few tools.
I agree. It's a shame that some of these things didn't sort of get investigated further or got left because of many of the changes in society that occurred shortly after. But anyway.
I wanted to just finally maybe, although other people can break in and ask questions, feel free to, but want to relate it back a little bit to Bitcoin itself. I mean, you have this 10-minute block time, and it seems to me like that's like serves a lot of different functions. But it's imperative that it's not too short and it's not too long, or else chaos. And just relating that back to the idea of the
well, you could make it too long and not have chaos, but then you would need a whole lot of extra systems. In a 10-minute average period, then there's not too long for people to wait or view things. And if you're doing large transactions, and if you're doing small transactions, you can always look at sort of the fact that the first scene rule means that most nodes should take your transaction after a few seconds, and there's enough trust in the system. So if you're buying a coffee, for instance, the fact that someone can try and double spend you later, well, so what? It's not in the interest of the node to do that. It's economically sort of outside of the scope of what should occur. No one's going to risk a multi-million or multi-billion-dollar facility to help you steal a coffee.
Yeah.
I mean, no one in their right mind, and that won't be an issue too long because you'll go bankrupt. And secondly, anyone who expects a $100 million international settlement to happen in a nanosecond, including full settlement, is insane.
Yes, absolutely. So I was relating it to the chain death spiral concept that BTC could potentially fall foul of because they haven't increased their block size. And, they're still trying to fit everything in the 10-minute block. So
no. Everyone will just be happy to pay more fees.
You think? Oh, just infinite fees?
Oh, it's not infinite, but it's just unbounded.
Okay,
so
fair.
When I don't know if you saw the show Red Dwarf.
Yeah.
There was an episode where Lister turned out to be the richest person in the universe. He'd left a few pounds in a bank account, and due to the wonders of compounding interest, Lister was now worth more than the galaxy. Unfortunately, he had also left a light on, and the power company was after him to collect.
And was it like £1 more than the
Yeah. But either way, I mean, trying to get that much money to hand back to them. So, yeah.
No, it's good idea. Well, the way I was thinking about it essentially is that because of this 10-minute clock cycle in Bitcoin, it is imperative that functions as sort of advertised. Otherwise, you get this slowing and freezing up. of the
if
chain.
nodes drop off because they're not making money, then you end up with problems. But they'll probably just change the system to fix that.
I
Add
just
a
thought
bit
it
of
was a nice
inflation,
analogy
image.
to your paper, and it's like you're trying to recreate the idea of the infinite tape, that doesn't exist in the universe.
Effectively,
You're kind of
I mean, I mean, it's unfortunate the word infinite, but it's just
sorry, unbounded tape, but
I know, but I mean, it's
yeah.
used, but it's only used because it's a simplification, rather than trying to explain this tape goes on as long as it needs to go on. You just say it's infinite. Explaining to the non-mathematician the difference between unbounded, infinite, classes of infinite, Cantor sort of bounds on infinity, that's never going to get you anywhere.
Right. So one of the things I'm most interested in is the idea of maintaining homeostasis, and it seems to me that with BSV, it allows you to maintain homeostasis because the block sizes are alterable, and in Bitcoin, it will soon go out of homeostasis and not be able to get back. Is there any analogy there worth having as it relates to
what will happen is they'll just change the system. You've already seen Mr. Todd there talking about how what they're going to do is potentially add inflation or add seigniorage or add something else. So we just add extra Bitcoin.
It sounds a bit like the government buying their own treasury bonds to me. That sounds like fuel on the fire.
No, at least in the case of government, there's some sort of relationship between government and the people and all of the rest. But not a Rousseauian sort of silly contract idea. I'm not a big fan of Rousseau and contract theory, but more use this because you want to keep the Ponzi going theory.
Yeah, exactly.
Fuel the Ponzi longer. I mean, if you're going to build the pyramid, well, we just keep building it. Like we put an extra layer and then an extra layer, and it will never collapse.
Only it will, every time. Has anyone
this
else
is what people don't get on the pyramids. They didn't come out of nothing. There were many failed attempts. If you actually go around Egypt, you can see like Meso step pyramids and how they were there. There are some smaller versions of the pyramids, some of which are collapsed. I mean, it was a trial and error thing. The pyramids didn't just first happen. There were actually failed pyramids where they collapsed in on themselves and things like this too.
You don't build them from the top down, you build them from the bottom up, so you can't keep putting extra layers on a pyramid.
Well,
really.
You get pretty big, as they demonstrated, but even that has a limit because the stone sort of, to crush itself. So
collapse under its own weight. Has anyone else got any other questions that I haven't asked? Because I'm sure there's lots, but that's the end of my list.
I guess I wondered a little bit about your game engine analogy near the end of the paper. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yes, I'm a computer scientist and I don't know anything better. So it's something I recognize. Having started my career in computer science and still doing a lot of discrete mathematics and other such things, I hate the typical Silicon Valley way of saying that we might all be a computer game simulation because it's too simplistic. The simulation is the map, not the reality. Whereas I think it's more complex. I think it's the other way around. But trying to explain that when you don't have any actual terms and concepts becomes difficult. So what I was trying to elaborate there is potentially each particle is effectively a point in an array. It would have to be a damn horribly big array. I mean, we're talking a universe size array. So one that's actually growing over time, but then so do computers. Yeah, so that's
So a universe-sized computer.
Yes, I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't think of the universe as an information computational sort of thing. Getting into more deist theology, you get into the hermeneutics of a thinking being of a universe, that we're all part of it. It's more like the ideas of Spinoza and things like this. This concept of we are part of the universe. The universe itself is God.
Coming to my question then about what is God's relationship with time?
I don't know. I've never asked him.
You have a close personal relationship there, yeah.
He doesn't answer me terribly much, though.
Will you ever write a paper about religion and time, or religion and the universe?
I have. I just haven't published it.
Oh, fantastic. Very much look forward to that one then.
Yeah.
One day I might.
What is the next paper that you're actually working on? Because, I mean, with yourself, I know I'm working on one, and it's probably going to take me about 13 years, and you probably have done about 20 within that time. So what's the next paper?
I've got a paper on lightning that is in final stages, including I can solve some of the problems of Lightning Network, but that's too bad. It'll be patented. Also doing a few different ones in the realm of blockchain. One for my PhD at Exeter, one to do with legal aspects of all of this at Leicester. Then there's the sawtooth issues with sort of block rewards, etc. There's extended papers on SPV, plus other topics. I'm doing military geography, so there'll be some more papers on that topic. Number of other bits and pieces. Slowly I'm writing, well, it's basically non-fiction, but also fiction. It's a fictionalized version of my grandfather's life, because I don't know all the bits. So the bits I don't know and no one knows, I'm filling in myself, as you do.
They're going to be very exciting.
I mean, if they can do that in the stupid book about me, and they can fill in all the bits he didn't know and make me a cypherpunk and all that sort of junk, then I can do it too. Author's privilege and license.
We look forward to reading that. It would be a fascinating read. So does anybody else have any questions for Craig?
No, I'm all done.
Can we go back to the Spinoza's concept? Are you saying that you relate to the idea that God is the universe and that we're all part of this collective consciousness?
Relate to it. What I will say is I don't contend to understand what I would call the idea of God in any way whatsoever. Okay. I like sort of the Augustinian concepts of theology, yeah.
And how does this re-envisioning time that you're describing in this paper relate to the multiverse?
Well, I don't believe, I mean, if there's a multiverse, then it's something outside there, and I don't believe any of the quantum splitting or universes popping in an exact, I mean, I believe we have our one and it's discrete. So I don't really believe in the multiverse theory. I believe it's a bad theory, trying to explain away God or other things by making a whole lot of other problems and pushing them under the rug. Okay. Look, God's gone. I've swept them under the rug now, so don't answer that. Yeah, but where did the multiverse come from? I told you not to ask. It's under the rug. It's gone.
Well, that's more an internal concept than an external concept.
Yeah, but I mean, everything happening everywhere. It's a horrible, horrible concept. I mean, whoever, some of those physicists and others. I mean, Kip Thorne and things like this, who came up with that crap. They should be ashamed of themselves for that. I mean, it's a munge. I mean, it's getting the mathematics and and manipulating it to fit an outcome.
Torturing it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not really how you should do physics and things like this.
What about this re-envisioning time? How does it relate to the metaverse? What you envision as the metaverse?
Well, it means basically we would have our universe, and our universe is here, and outside of our universe there isn't time, so you can't really speak of what the hell there would be outside of the universe because it's not time. But what we have here is a series of states that change from state to state.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like, although you can say that your computer is acting within time because it's part of the universe, the state changes of your computer are sort of not the same as the outside world. So if you're talking about a game that you put on pause and you hold and you do things to, then it might continue seamlessly from inside the game, but outside the game is something different. So I mean, maybe if there is a outside God, or if you don't want to make it God, interdimensional alien race, maybe they could occasionally put our universe on pause. Maybe it's like
So
Terry
we are in a
Pratchett's,
simulation.
maybe, well, not a simulation, but an actual universe, like Terry Pratchett's concept of a student's accidental sort of physics experiment by creating this universe. Oops, sorry, Professor, I made this fucked up universe. I don't know what to do with it. They've only got 3 spatial dimensions, and
Essentially, that's what they're doing when they put you to sleep. They're preventing cell-to-cell communication, and so it's as though time stops.
Stasis.
Because there's no entropy. Well, I mean, it's not known entropy.
well,
you would
yeah,
still,
I mean,
your bodily
when you're
process
sleeping, there are
still
still a
work.
lot of things happening.
Yeah, but in terms of our
your body's actually quite busy when you're
perception.
sleeping.
Yeah, biologically.
Your brain's very busy too. It's flushing a whole lot of plaque out and other such things. So different bits of the brain happen. Memory consolidation happens, but yeah, it's different.
Are they the physical sciences you talked about in Slack, where if we re-envision time, we can unlock new concepts in both philosophy and the physical sciences?
Yes, what we'll unlock, I don't know.
Okay, any ideas?
No, but we unlocked new things when Einstein had a better approximation. I believe that we can make better approximations. Newton's envisioning of physics was a better approximation. Calculus, whether it's Newton or Leibniz, is a good approximation, but we have munged it by requiring that we have an infinite regress, and we just sort of ignore that. But I mean, it's a good approximation, but it's not perfect, and we've got to stop. I mean, I think we need to teach students to stop thinking of the infinite other than as it's a good approximation.
So yours is a better approximation in a way?
Not yet, but what I'm working on, I hope will be.
Ooh. Is there anything you can say about that?
Sort of just more mathematical basis of what I've got in the paper I've just released. So
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Well, that seems like a good time to leave it because we're just under your time. So thank you so much, Dr. Craig Wright. It's an absolute pleasure talking to you.
You're welcome.
See you again soon.
And thank you again for being so generous with your time as well. So we really appreciate it. Thank you, Craig.
Oh, thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye.